Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today is another of our special shows previewing what we can expect in our upcoming TAtech Europe event, which is in Paris in 2 weeks from tomorrow. Actually, 2 weeks from tonight will be the welcome reception. So we're looking forward to welcoming as many of you as possible. And amongst our number will be my very special guest today, Antonia Manoochehri. Is joining us from Lumenai and actually physically from the heart of Spain. Good afternoon, Antonia. How are you? Oh, I think you're on mute. Let me just unmute you. Here we go.
Hello from Madrid, second time.
Hello from Madrid. How is the weather in Madrid? Just second us by how nice it is.
It is lovely. I have to be honest. After having lived in England for many years, it's very nice not to be heading into darkness.
Do you feel more European now that you're on mainland Europe?
I think that's the first time I thought about it, but yes, of course, very European indeed.
So in Scotland, we always think of ourselves as more European than British, which I know is a peculiar thing for anyone in England, but we kind of do. But if I lived in mainland Europe, I'd certainly be. I'd have that sense of it, and that thought is very relevant to the event that we've got coming up, because we're in Paris. Whenever you look at maps of Europe, then all roads, I know they say they lead to Rome, but they lead to Paris as well. And we're hoping that people are going to be using those roads to come to the event in 2 weeks' time, and you're going to be joining us. You've been to TAtech events. Multiple TAtech events before. You were with us in June in Washington and TAtech Europe in London last year. For a first timer coming to our events, when you were a first timer, what were your initial impressions of TAtech events?
I love your events, not only because you champion businesses. You're very focused on who you curate as being part of your, who you're showcasing and who you're inviting, but you actually understand why we come to these events. I think that there's a big drive in a lot of events that I've chosen not to go to as a startup, because they often have a ticket price, and you're super receptive to bringing people independent on where they're at in the stage of business. So it's not commercially driven in that way. It's about actually bringing people to a stage who are actually bringing value. So that to me is a massive piece, and the support that you've given Lumenai is hugely appreciated, and we love being part of TAtech. But also there's a strong focus on making sure that there is a space to talk business with people. It's not just a showcase for high ticket price talks. It's an actual, also because I come from academia and education, it's a real environment where you make real connections. You can network in a very cohesive way. So for me, you've got my vote completely, and we will be lifelong friends.
Fantastic. Well, that's really nice to hear. Yeah, I sometimes liken it to so when you go to other events in our industry, which are like Unleash or HR Tech or RecFest, these events are great, and the primary audience are people in TA who are coming to socialize with each other, to see technologies and so on. So there's a mix of people in the room. But if you think of it, a convention of plumbers, they get together and they talk about things that they wouldn't talk about when there are customers in the room, and they get down to the nitty gritty of the industry that they're in, the landscape that they're in. They might have a good moan about things. They might talk about new technologies, new possibilities, and so on. And the events that we have, we try and make sure that people are able to do those things, and typically the people who are coming along are founders and CEOs like yourself, from very small companies to huge companies, but they're on a peer level with each other, senior executives, founders, CEOs, who are looking to not only network but to do deals.
Totally agree with that. And of course, I think the other events are great, but I come back to yours, or I want to be aligned with yours, because there's something really authentic about it. And I think that ties very nicely into what we're going to talk about today, because I think for me, the business landscape that we're in, unless there is a real value exchange, which we do find at TAtech, and it's a significant value exchange that's extremely well curated in between talks and the breakout spaces for business. I think we're in a massive pivot, and I think that unless we're building alliances and partnerships in that way, I can't see how the future will be bright. I think a lot of things will be hitting the wall, are hitting the wall, and AI is accelerating that. And so the question is what remains, and it's the partnerships that we build, it's the relationships that we have, it's how we're looking at solving problems in the marketplace that are sustainable and robust. So, I mean, for me, your TAtech is the go-to for me in that respect.
Yeah. So you mentioned pivoting there, the market evolving more rapidly than before. I reckon there's a bit of 3D chess going on. It's a much more sophisticated and fast-moving marketplace. You can't really just be a for example a job board and focus on your clients and have the occasional look to see what your competitors are doing. It's much more. It's not two-dimensional like that. You need to think three spaces ahead, and also who are the other potential players in the game. So the way that you do that is by having the conversations. You can't do it at a distance, and sometimes you might need to speak with people who in other times you wouldn't dream of having a conversation with.
I think you're talking about the difference between actually building relationships and performing that.
Yeah.
And so there's a big vernacular in business, the whole startup vernacular. I find it quite distasteful because I come from an academic and a background of expertise in assessment, and so the vernacular is kind of pointless. You're selling snake oil to people for what purpose? For profit. Well, it's kind of it's not us, and it's not to say you don't make profit, but I think that you have to your value proposition has to deliver on what your promises are. So I think essentially what you're underlining is this idea of authenticity, and where does authenticity come from, and how do we build those trusted relationships, and why are we building them, and for what purpose? And so if we tie that all together in a nice little package, then to have events that you can go to where you can build and continue building relationships, where you can engage in interesting content, and it's not just the vernacular of that, it's not performed through a kind of big marketing machine, I think is a very foundational piece that, well, I'm seeing it being built, and I think it needs to grow, and it is growing, because I think you can't have good ideas being funded by VCs and, selling snake oil. There's a time limit on that. And I think we're at such a critical pivot in the future of work that, that business model is changing. We're getting a lot of traction through the partnership model, coming from an academic background, incubated in an academic environment, and looking at how we're creating the bridge, which is very much in alignment with what you're talking about too.
For the benefit of anyone watching who isn't aware of Lumenai, can you give us a précis of the purpose of Lumenai and how it fits into the hiring landscape out there, and what your trajectory is?
Sure. So Lumenai is, I come from an assessment background, having worked for Pearson for over 25 years and worked in learning and development, both in China and in schools in the UK. And so for me, essentially, Lumenai is a very robust scientific assessment methodology that measures human capability. Now, the way we go about that is we call it human capability indexing. So we're writing academically about that. We have a methodology, we have a piece of tech that does that, but we're building different use cases through a labs model. So essentially it's a partnership model of looking at the value of how human capability indexing can accelerate certain things like quality of hire, volume hiring, and so forth. And in that context, we create an opportunity for partnerships in looking at what the future of work is and what type of data architecture we need in place to drive the change that is coming.
So in practical terms, how would Lumenai fit with other technologies out there, and how would an employer see the benefit in integrating your platform?
So Lumenai, we collect human capability index. So we index your human capabilities within your organization, and we have a modal piece. So it's a frictionless piece of technology that sits within your tech stack. It complements anything like psychometric testing. We're not ripping and replacing that. We're coming along to add another data layer of value. And so what we do is it depends on what. So for instance, a quality of hire piece is you can internally benchmark, and then you can recruit into that data landscape that you've created of best fit modeling, or what looks good, or a cultural fit. So essentially we're a very low cost, easily implemented tool. But what we're doing is we're bringing a strong piece around human-centered AI and how human capability indexing will be the structural framework that you run human AI interactions on. So that sounds a bit space age at the moment, but in the day-to-day sense, we can look at quality of hire now, and in the future, that piece, that human capability index that you create that will solve your quality of hire or volume hire piece now will also create a data framework that you start to look at the human AI interactions in relation. A talent acquisition manager will have a changing relationship with how they write job descriptions, for instance. So you'll have an AI piece writing a job description, but there needs to be a capability index in there so we can carefully calibrate it against roles and responsibilities.
And of course, benchmarking existing staff that you have and building a model of your current capabilities across your organization.
Exactly right. Yeah. And once you've done that indexing, that capability indexing, you can accelerate a number of business processes. And that's what we're doing through a labs model. So we're partnering with big enterprises at the moment, looking at different areas, different pain points within business around the value of human capability indexing.
Are you able to mention any of the enterprises you're working with?
Happily, but off recorded.
So, hush hush for the moment.
It's not a hush hush. I think to some extent we're operating in stealth because the landscape is so. I don't know. I'd prefer to be as transparent as I could be as an academic. Like the academic authoring we're doing. So we're co-authoring with some big names at the moment, and that will be out in the coming months. But essentially, what we're doing through the academic authoring, we're putting stuff out in a transparent way. But we believe we have to be a little bit stealth in terms of just, unfortunately, the market tends to be. I don't know. I mean, it's not how I'd like to do business, but it will be coming out. You can all come and give me a bell and we'll talk about it offline.
So people often come to business from different directions. I got into business from being a frontline agency recruiter, and then set up an agency and built and sold a couple of businesses over the past couple of decades, and that's relatively traditional. But people in my position are usually unaware of the equally traditional, if you're in that area, route to market or route to a company being formed from academia. And we're often oblivious to how those things crystallize into a business. And that's one of the key thing that you're going to be speaking about in Paris. So whether it's Lumenai or other typical organizations, how does a project or a research project become a business from within an academic environment?
Well, I think you have to think of the premise to why people might want to incubate in a university innovation department. For me, it was because we were working, had a small learning and development company in China, and literally any idea that you tried to scale was ripped off by someone. So it was great learning working in China. And I think that got me to thinking about how could you build something, a robust solution that was based on expertise that you could grow and look after in a marketplace. And so incubating in a university is a very good way to think about doing that, not only because you have the endorsement of the university behind you, but because they actually nurture you in a different way. So you don't have to go down a VC route. You can work on your value proposition without being driven by demands of VC funders and so forth. For us, the route in was a bit different. That we were doing some work with a clinical trial, so an academic from Oxford University who was looking at how they could action their clinical trials framework. So that might need a bit of defining. So a framework is maybe an outline of how you go about something. So there's a lot of frameworks at the moment around skills. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can measure whether someone understands that framework. So that was the conversation we were having with this clinical trials academic. And at that point, we didn't have any technology. So it was just a great opportunity to partner and go to Oxford University Innovation and look at how we could build out that technology.
So I imagine the question is often asked, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the business or the research, and then, there's a business in this?
I think I would hate to define this as the only way to think about it, but the way we thought about it was, we believe in the power of expertise driving business. And so then the question was, where could we incubate that in a safe environment that would support our approach to that at an extremely vulnerable time? Because I suppose when you're in a very, very early stage of a startup, you really don't know what you're doing. And especially if you come
Yeah.
from an academic background, your understanding of business is probably quite limited. So you need to be in an environment where you can be nurtured and trained and, mentored and so forth.
Yeah. People understand the pharmaceutical and biomedical industries coming out of universities, where there's a lot of work gone into understanding how things work at a biological level, and then producing a product that comes out of the research behind that. So in that case, there's been a huge amount of legwork done that perhaps can only be done in a university environment. Effectively or cost effectively, where you might have many hands working on the project, really clever minds working on a project, but that then crystallizes into, oh, we've got something here. So when you're looking at a product like Lumenai, then the way to make that work, and tell me if I'm wrong, is having huge tranches of information that you can work with, that you can disseminate, that you can prove your theories, and that evolves into eventually a technical platform, technology platform.
Yeah, I suppose you're looking at this, the whole idea of IP. A university is full of IP, but it doesn't mean that something outside of the university can't be as IP rich. So in the context of Oxford, the collaboration with an academic is what would endorse that. And then the building essentially has to be an idea of substance. I mean, it's not to say that within a university incubator, you can't do a pure profit business model. But it creates an opportunity for you to really consider what the IP is and how you're going to build that out in our context into a piece of technology. And also it allows you, because I come from a background in education and assessment, I'm just aligned to doing things properly, or to doing things with academic rigor, because I was also studying for a PhD. So in that context, it gives you, it drives you into that space a bit more, rather than the VC model, which is just perform your idea for me and get some funding and let's get going. Let's see how much profit we can make out of this.
I think credibility is really important. Any organization that comes out of universities based on data science, then people will ask, who is your chief data scientist, and what are their credentials? So when looking at this area of behavioral or understanding capabilities, then credibility of the source of where this business was incubated is really important, because people are looking for that credibility on. But when you say, well, this works, it's much more believable that it does work. And
I don't think it's not just a badge. It's about being part of a network where you can build out the integrity of the idea. I think there would be a danger to say you just go and find a university and stick a badge on what you're doing, because I wouldn't endorse that. I think essentially maybe I'm naive, but I think that you seek out a university environment if you want to build rigor or build around rigor. So the whole idea, so you have two models within university. You have a spin out, which is existing IP within the university, and then you have an incubator, or a startup space where IP might come outside of the university, or there might be a collaborative piece with someone within the university. So there is an endorsement, or there is a standard setting in terms of how someone may come into that. And then there are levels of engagement. So in phase one of the innovation department, you're not yet essentially aligned with Oxford University. You're exploring your ideas. And when you incorporate, Oxford University takes 5% of your company. So essentially you can see that as an endorsement, but they're very strict about how you perform that endorsement. You can't just slap it all over your website, because there is let's say arguably there is an integrity in what you are performing in a business context. They are shareholders of the company who will hold you to account on that. We incorporated as a social venture, which I'll go into more in TAtech in Paris. And it's a really interesting business model where at one end of the scale, you're looking at charities, which are non-profit. And then on the other end of the scale, you're looking at pure profit. And a social venture sits in the middle. So essentially, there's accountability structures in terms of how you're going about doing business. And one of those would be your social mission, which is in your articles of association. That accountability fans out. So incubating in a university is one part of that desire for accountability. You believe in doing something properly, you believe in the transparency around what you're doing, and you're not interested in a business model that maybe you can accelerate it in 1 year, make a gazillion pounds and exit. That's not what you're doing. It doesn't mean you're naive and you're sitting at one end of a charity space. It's quite the opposite. You're sitting dynamically between what is charity and social impact and what is business and profit. And for me, it's the intersection of both of them that is what's interesting about what we are doing and what other people in university incubators are doing, is it gives you the opportunity to build out in a really robust way. And of course, endorsement comes from that, but you have to build the use cases, you have to build the relationships to define that, and you will be held to account by the university in how you're going about that. They're super strict about how you put the logo on your website and so forth, and they should be.
You touched on one area that I was definitely going to go into is, when a company evolves from a university environment, as you say, either spin out or incubator, that the university takes a stake, and even though it's not an endorsement, it's a degree of their reputation on the line, where they're involved in your business. They're keeping a weather eye on things, and I suppose at any point they could say, well, actually, you're going the direction we're not keen on. We're out here. I would imagine if you were a spin out, then they might take a more substantial stake in the business, or look to do that.
I believe so, but I think that what you're pointing out is the legal structure around what you're doing is super strict, and there is strong legalities around how you represent the university and their right, as you say, to withdraw. That's not it's not holding a Damoclean sword over your head, because actually I don't think you'd get to that stage unless what you were doing. I don't know. It's, in a way, it takes a long time for you to incorporate and for them to take their percentage of your company.
So in a business like yours, where you're dealing with huge amounts of information and data, whether it's identifiable or not, but data on individuals, and you're able to discern from that data a lot of other information you can extrapolate from that. Is there a path going back to the university where they're able to learn from what you've learned, and that helps either other projects or even students doing research?
I think the one thing we should focus on more is the mentorship that you get from being part of the incubator. So Kath Spence, who runs the incubator at the Innovation Department at Oxford, is phenomenal and has been absolutely integral to how I've developed, basically coming with an idea, with an academic, into a business, with value proposition, into go-to-market strategy and so forth. And actually it's that engagement in mentorship. So I'd say in a way that everything you do is disseminated, but with a small d, because the mentorship and the network around that and the engagement and the ongoing engagement with the incubator is you become part of the family, so to speak. And so you interact with people in the incubator, so you still have office space. So it works in any, there's all sorts of ways of doing it in terms of co-working and so forth. But the incubator has a special relationship, and it has an ecosystem within Oxford. So we've been able to negotiate our legal engagement with Mishcon de Rare, who are part of the incubator. We're now working with key people in that. So Nicola and Canal are phenomenal. Adam from the incubator is phenomenal in terms of creating access points to how we can get the help we need. So we're looking at innovative company structures around social ventures, because we believe that there is a complete, there's a synergy between what we're building in a social venture, i.e. where does profit sit and where does social value sit, and how do we leverage both in the most intelligent way to get the most out for everybody. And so essentially the dissemination is an ongoing conversation. I don't think it's a formal process. I think it's more that you're constantly in engagement with people in the incubator, in the innovation department, and and there's huge freedom for you to explore as you will and engage with that network and build partnerships.
One of the things I've always been fascinated to see is what with business incubators, especially in technologies, is when they're in close proximity to each other, and the people who are running the business or working in the businesses are able to literally look over each other's shoulders. There's a lot to be learned, and it's almost frightening how fast things can accelerate for people when they're in amongst clever people with maybe totally different types of businesses, but they can really help each other.
Oh, and they do. And but then I suppose, I mean, in general terms, I think being a startup, I mean, through your network, through the networks that you build through LinkedIn and so forth, there's a huge enthusiasm and
Yeah,
openness.
yeah.
But I think the key definition within a university is you have access to networks. So, for instance, legally, I don't think I would have been able to engage with Michigan de Rea unless it was
Mm,
partnered with University of Oxford
yeah.
Innovation.
So, just by way of contrast, I'm going to mention it, but don't slap me in the face for mentioning it. People will know of, going back a few years now, there was a something company called Cambridge Analytica, which was, now I don't even know the connection to that other university, but that was in the business of gathering huge amounts of information, and it seemed to disappear in a flash. Was that a university led, or a business that came out of university?
I don't know, but case in point would be whether it came out or not. I mean, there's all sorts. I mean, when I was in China, I remember I was learning a bit of Mandarin for my, I don't know, it was a great thing to do, very hard. But we were looking at trademarking in China at the time. And literally, I mean, this is my point. Anyone could put the name Oxford or Cambridge in what they do. And in China, they're even trademarking it. They're using different characters phonetically so it's a good example. I don't know. I mean, we know what happened with Cambridge Analytica, but I don't think a university would have endorsed what they were doing if they had been incubated out of Cambridge. I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of those. It's one of those stories that that burns bright, disappears, and after a while you think, whatever happened to them, and how did it happen in the first place? So there might be a salutary lesson to be learned from that. That said, moving on very quickly, I'm really looking forward to Paris. How well do you know Paris? Do you know your way
I
around
don't.
Paris?
Enlighten me. Tell me where I need to go, where you're set up. I've had a look on the map, and you're quite close to the railway station. But tell me more.
So I've only been to Paris a couple of times before, and frankly, I wasn't paying that much attention. But I was back in June just to check the venue, and the venue is just north. It's north of the river, and it's just north of the Place de la Concorde. And there's a strip of land from the Louvre all the way to the Arc de Triomphe, and basically, if you know your way up and down that, then you can get to pretty much most of the places you want to see in Paris. And we're maybe a few hundred yards to the north of Place de la Concorde. So in terms of walking distance to anywhere, it's pretty handy. You can certainly walk to the Champs-Élysées from there. And the venue that we are in, it's the Circle National des Armées, which is it's a very typically Parisian old school building, but it's an association for anyone in the armed forces in France. So there's lots of memorabilia around the walls and so on of that, and there's an amazing church just outside. It's very close. It's very close to the presidential palace as well. So in terms of location, you couldn't get more central. It's really cool.
You do very well with your locations. I remember the Spy Museum in Washington. I think that you've got quite an art form of collecting these amazing buildings to have your events.
So we're big believers that the venue itself can lend itself to the networking. If you're meeting in one of the chain hotels in one of their big ballrooms, then there's nothing comes from that at all. There's no personality in the place. But when you're in an unusual premise like this, and it's hard to mention to state exactly why, it's a catalyst. And it really helps for those sorts of things. When people come to conferences cold, especially if they come, on their own, and going into a room full of people that you might know some, you might not know any, it can be quite daunting. But if you've got an icebreaker, which is the venue itself, then you immediately feel, more at home, and it's easy to do your research before you get there. So a great icebreaker is, look at this venue, look where we are in Paris. It just helps to make all those things much smoother.
It's also really fun. I loved coming to the Spy Museum in Washington. I think you choose your venues extremely well. So it's not only that you get a good, you have a great event and meet great people. It's the environment is brilliant. So I'm looking forward to that a lot.
And I've heard people say Paris in September. It's the place to be. It's not too hot, but it's perfectly warm for walking around, and it's a beautiful place. I made the mistake in going there in June. It was pretty toasty, and I cycled from our venue to the Eiffel Tower, and then I thought I'll get a ticket to go up, not realizing I got a ticket for the stairs. So, so with my bag on my back, I climbed the stairs to halfway up the Eiffel Tower, and by the time I got there, I was absolutely beat.
It's
The sun
great
was
though.
killing me.
It's great going up the Eiffel Tower. I remember in Hanoi, Eiffel had built a bridge in Hanoi, and I loved that. I loved the juxtaposition of this rusty old bridge in Hanoi and the Eiffel
Yeah.
Tower. So there you go.
The thing is, when you go to places like this, you can't come home not having done something like that, especially when the weather's nice and you're right there. People are going to ask, so did you see the Arc de Triomphe? Did you see the Eiffel Tower? And of course, you need to make the effort to do that. So it's a big attraction to people coming, and we have quite a few guests coming from Paris and France. So there'll be a lot of experts in the room. And I'm really looking forward to polishing up my French with them, and maybe accidentally offending a couple of people by getting it wrong, because my French is not that good.
You can speak French for me. You can do all the French speaking.
I don't think so. My co-host on the day is Stephen Bauer, who is with our event sponsors, HR Flow, and Stephen Bauer is from Colorado. But his parents were French, and he's been living in Paris for a long time. In fact, he's just now moved to Marseille. But he'll be my spirit guide for the conference in Paris. So really looking forward to seeing you and all the guests. Thanks everyone who's joined us today. Please make a point of looking up the agenda for Antonia's session. It's going to be an absolute cracker, and of course, if you haven't booked your tickets, please do so. There's plenty of space, and you'll be very, very welcome in Paris. So, Antonia, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was been a pleasure, everyone, as always.
Thanks everyone who's joining us live or on replay, and I hope to see you in Paris. Thank you.
In Paris. Take care.